welcome back to the Pool Pro Podcast. We're going to answer some questions live for the last podcast episode where Greg was talking about ozone with Dave. We had some questions and we wanted to answer those live for you. So the first question, Dave and Greg, is will an ozone system with an O2 concentrator sized for 5 to 10 grams of ozone per hour for a 20,000 gallon residential pool work in Hawaii or the tropics?
So the answer to that is it depends.
Got
And
it.
that's a nebulous answer to a nebulous question. So let's break it down. Having an O2 concentrator is really good. What that means is we're drawing ambient air, pulling the nitrogen out, and then sending concentrated oxygen to the ozone generator. As a side benefit, we're drying the air in the process, which is really good for corona discharge ozone. So in Hawaii or the tropics in general, it's very important that we're drying that air. The ambient humidity in those regions is significantly higher and it's consistently high. So first step, good job on using the O2 concentrator with the air dryer. Maintenance is going to be critical. And from my experience in tropical climates, there's stuff in the air. So make sure you have sufficient pre-air filtration. And then depending on where it will be located, be prepared to deal with the inevitable animal activity around the devices. It's amazing what comes out when the lights turn up.
Right, exactly.
As far as the ozone dosage, without knowing what's in the water, it's really difficult to speculate. The rule of thumb is the more ozone, the better. The more ozone you can cram in as quickly as possible, the better. So to make your ozone system work better, minimize the ingress of organic contaminants, make sure you're filtering as much as possible, as fast as possible, and make sure you're circulating at an appropriate speed for that pool. If the pool is going to be exposed to a very heavy bather loading, then your ozone numbers go through the roof. You have to use a lot more. And of course, I do not advocate ozone on its own as a treatment technology. I like a residual chlorine in the water. Good question.
Yeah, it was a good question.
What I would add to that is a couple of things. I would invest in a high quality oxygen meter, and every 6 months throw that meter on and check your purity because of the moisture in the air, and as Greg said, the contaminants. You're going to want to monitor the function of your sieve beds, and you might want to make sure you buy an oxygen concentrator that's easy to work on and that has a good parts availability, because you may go through sieve beds a little faster than say California, where it's cooler and drier. The other thing I'd say is, if you 5 to 10 grams of ozone is a wide swing. Because of the heat and everything else, I would tend towards recommending the 10-gram system. And then, as we talked about in other parts of our podcast, don't rely on your ozone as your only sanitizer. And the best way to keep chlorine usage to an absolute minimum is to add in a dosing system that will control your pH and your chlorine dosing, so that you're dosing just the right amount of chlorine. The systems I use pump about 2 ounces per minute of chlorine into the water. And so they're very adaptable, they recover very quickly. And that's going to help keep your water the nicest. Also, using the bigger ozone generator, it's not just about building more ozone into the water, but you're creating more ozone, which gives the pool a chance to recover more quickly from bather load and other things.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I would say about that is, if you can find, you can find, I'd be happy to help anybody with this, a chemical controller that has a dual ORP setting. This will allow you to put the chlorine on ORP2, and we'll keep the minimal baseline water quality where it needs to be. You can run the oxygen concentrator whenever the pool pump is running. You're never hurting anything by adding oxygen to the water. And then plugging your ozone generator into ORP1 and setting it up. You can set it up high, like 800 or so. And at that rate, the highly dissolved ozone in the water is undetectable. You won't smell it, you won't feel it. So that way you'll get the most out of your ozone while limiting the pool from getting too much ozone in it. You'll have basically, it's a recipe for a bulletproof pool on a residential side as far as I've seen. Greg, you can disagree if you.
No, I don't disagree at all. I think that's excellent advice. And the dual ORP controller gives you that redundant protection. So keep your baseline ORP with your chlorine, work that ozone ORP. It's the best of both worlds. I think it's a really smart approach.
Nice. Question number 2 is how do the microplasma ozone systems match up with the corona discharge systems?
Microplasma technology is very cool. And it generates, for the same amount of energy in, it generates significantly more ozone out. And there's a few companies here in the US that have really been pioneering the plasma ozone generation when it comes to applications like this. And I've had a lot of experience with that on the wastewater and then scary contaminant side on the drinking water side, perfluorinated alkyl compounds, PFOS, PFOA, things like that. I think that's going to be the future. I think eventually plasma will displace corona discharge completely. The biggest problem we have with plasma right now is the CapEx, the capital cost, putting the equipment in, and then the electrode longevity and maintenance. So it's early days, but I believe this will be the gold standard within the next 10 years.
So corona discharge units also need at least annual maintenance, depending on the amount of hours that they run. The O-rings need to be replaced, chambers need to be rebuilt. There's I'm very familiar with that. I've been working with that for 25 years, but what is the maintenance on a plasma gap unit?
So the plasma, you've got the reaction chamber and the electrode. And typically it's a titanium electrode, but I've seen various manufacturers doing variants of titanium, yttrium, various other exotic metals. So there's going to be periodic maintenance depending on the amount of plasma being produced and the mineral contact from the electrode and the water. The higher the mineral content of the water, the more frequently that electrode's going to need to be replaced. And again, pools come into an issue there. So there's 2 parts to it. The first is plasma ozone generation, where the ozone then is distributed into the water. That's the simplest, lowest maintenance, but you have a lot of loss of energy. The best way is where that electrode is at surface contact within the spark gap, generating that plasma, because now you're doing things that are just phenomenal. You're able to mineralize organic compounds. You could take an amino acid and mineralize it down into nitrate and phosphate. And you could take bacteria and basically turn it into popcorn. And so a lot of work's being sponsored by the US Navy in this for ballast and bilge waters.
Okay.
And this is coming along really nicely. There's a couple of companies that are capitalizing it and trying to commercialize it right now. It's still premature. I wouldn't be using it on a pool for production use quite just yet. Fun to experiment with, and we've had some really good results on the industrial side. The technology is legit. It's describable. It's measurable. And those are my 2 criteria with anything. If you can't measure it, then I can't believe in it.
Yep.
And
Right.
so this is measurable and it's legit. It's just early days for pool, but stay tuned. I think you're going to see in the next couple, 3 years, it'll move really fast.
Now, there are some companies that are introducing plasma gap technology into the swimming pool world. There are commercially available plasma gap units for pools. I have used them with success. 99% of what I put in is Corona discharge,
Right.
and I have a favorite manufacturer that I've worked with for years. And we're not going to get into different manufacturers and recommending products here, but there is some really good technology out there. The downside of it is expensive to maintain. It is labor intensive to maintain these systems. And that's kind of where I would hope that, again, we talked about filtration technology. The units I've been selling, the technology has not changed dramatically in over 20 years that I've worked with Ozone. And it would be kind of nice to see, if they're going to make some improvements, it would be nice to see them become a little less of a maintenance
Problem. Yeah.
And that's
issue.
where plasma shows potential
Yeah.
because your quality of your air is significantly less critical. And so now we're not dealing with the molecular sieve to get the nitrate out. We're not dealing with as much complexity with humidity. What I've seen on the prosumer level seems a little underpowered, but I haven't tried any of them. I've been working with the bigger heavy duty stuff.
Mhm.
I really think it has potential. I think it's going to go places, and particularly where there's some big companies behind it here in the States. I think we're going to see that progress forward, and we'll be able to overcome a lot of the negatives that we've all experienced with ozone.
Before I let you go,
tubing,
Greg,
seals.
what is the name of a company? If somebody want to do some more research on this and just kind of understand it a little bit better, where would they go? Or would they go to a company website, or is there information out there?
Yeah, there's a lot of information out there. The DARPA website.
Okay, that's
DARPA has
DARPA.
DARPA.
Okay,
They have information on it. And if one were just to Google cold plasma generation,
okay, good,
there's a lot of good info out there.
perfect.
Keep up the good work.
Thanks.
Yes. Thanks, Greg.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Nan.
And Dave, I have two more questions for you, and then I'll edit this.
I want to say something. We appreciate Greg, what he did for us.
Yeah.
But we also really appreciate the people who interacted with us, who listened to our
Yes.
podcast and actually came up with questions. And hopefully we kind of went down the rabbit hole in our answers, and it was a long answer to a short question, but
I think it's helpful. What you guys said is helpful to somebody who has an interest,
hopefully they can discern, some value out of all those words. But that's the thing with our podcast, is we really are putting this out for people who want to see better water quality in their pools, for professionals who want to create better water quality for their customers.
Yes.
And so we really appreciate your listening, and we're delighted if you want to interact with us, if you want to ask us questions, you want to tell us what you like or what you don't like. We're all ears.
And I think we're going to go to a format on Pool Pro, Dave. We can go Facebook Live and answer questions live on Facebook on the Pool Pro page in the future, or we could record it and put it on the YouTube channel. Either way, we're going to make sure your questions, the answers to your questions, get out there, so that you're not just having it out in the air in the stratosphere, as I call it, with no answer to it. But I appreciate that. And I have two more questions for you, Dave.
Okay.
About how much more energy does an oxygen concentrator add to a typical home with an ozone system that uses 5 to 10 grams per hour of ozone?
My unit on my pool is a 15 gram an hour ozone generator with an oxygen concentrator and I put an amp meter on it. It draws about 6.5 amps.
Okay.
So it's not nothing. When you talk about increasing your water quality with the technology that we have right now, they require a minimum flow rate to make the system work, and they do add an electric load to the system. So if you're looking for these extreme energy savings, you're going to give a little of that back when you put an ozone system on it. Same is true of a UV light, or any of these systems require a little bit of electricity. An ozone system is probably the most energy hungry of all of them. It has to be for somebody who really
Cares about that
appreciates the
quality.
value
Yeah.
of what we're doing with the water quality.
But you're saving money on chemicals, aren't you? By putting, I mean, there's an investment up front with the ozone system, but aren't you overall saving money on chemicals? You're using less
You
chlorine,
will,
right?
yes. You're also saving by not adding as much TDS to the water.
Yeah.
By lowering the amount of chlorine that you add, you're not putting the impurities that come along with chlorine into the water that require you to drain it more frequently.
Yeah, so there is kind of a trade-off there as far as cost.
I wouldn't say it's a complete trade-off, but
Right.
it's somewhat of a compensation.
Right, absolutely. And then the last question is, what are the maintenance requirements needed for a typical ozone system? I mean, again, they keep referencing the 5 to 10 grams per hour of ozone with an oxygen concentrator. So I guess they just want to know what kind of maintenance a system like that's going to require, Dave.
Greg and I touched on that a little bit. What Greg said is very important, keeping those filters clean, especially in a warm climate, in a humid climate. There are generally fan filters. There's fans that cool the ozone generator. There's filters that have to, you can just, they're little sponges, you can take them out and rinse them off. You should keep some in your truck and replace them when they start to wear out. The oxygen concentrator also has an intake air filter. Some of them have filters inside the unit. Read the manual when you get it, and know where those filters are. Keeping that air clean, as Greg pointed out, is huge. And that'll help your compressor life as well. Measuring the purity and the output of your oxygen concentrator, that tells you the health of your sieve beds. That's a direct link to the amount of ozone you're producing. The purity of your oxygen directly affects the amount of ozone you're making. A lot of ozone generators have a little desiccant filter inside. It turns from blue to pink when it gets moist. That'll tell you that your oxygen unit is not doing well. If it's pink, but you want to check that, I would pull the cover off of the ozone generator every 3 months and just have a good look in there.
Got it.
And different manufacturers are different. Some have diagnostic boards will tell you things about it, what's going on, but basically keep watching your gauges and your pressures each visit to the pool, making sure that you're drawing in the ozone, mixing it with the water properly, and then checking your filters. I look under them once a month and just make sure your filters are clean. And then once a year, roughly once a year, definitely based on the color of that desiccant, you'll want to service your ozone chambers. Plasma gap's a little different. And some of these, being in Hawaii, it's a little different because some of the manufacturers want you to pull the unit off the wall and send it in and let them rebuild it at the factory. That's a bit problematic when you're, especially when you're relying on ozone as your primary sanitizer and backing it up with chlorine, like we talked about with the dual ORP system. Or if you pull that ozone, if you're chlorinating by hand, you're going to obviously go back to using a lot more chlorine and doing it by hand.
It sounds like they need a a maintenance shop out there, Dave, to rebuild these things if necessary. So there's an opportunity to go to Hawaii.
I'd go in a heartbeat. I love it.
Yes. Well, we wanted to make sure we answered your questions live. Thank you for posting those comments. Like Dave said, we are so appreciative of you listening. We've been getting comments and messages from people in Spain and Italy and other countries, Mexico, Canada, and different parts of the US, obviously. And so we really appreciate it, you taking the time to listen while you're working. Hopefully you're driving, you can put it on and listen to what we're talking about. We're going to keep going for you and have more interesting topics coming up. But again, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
A new voice in the industry, a resource for all, education for you. This is Pool Pro Podcast. Build relationships and share important news as we get ready for our next backyard adventure. Pool Pro Podcast. Backyard adventures are better together. Please take a moment to share, like, and review our content with all of those that would be interested.